In the early 2000s, luxury crossovers did not look the way they do today. They were upright, boxy, and built around utility rather than proportion. That changed in 2003, when Infiniti introduced the FX35, a crossover designed with the proportions of a sports coupe, featuring a sloping roofline, a long hood, and a stance that did not follow any existing template. It raised a simple question: what if a crossover did not have to look like a truck? The engineering supported that idea. In testing, the FX35 delivered handling characteristics closer to performance sedans than traditional SUVs, outperforming established competitors and proving that the concept was not just stylistic, but functional. And it worked. But that is not how the market remembers it. 5 years later, BMW introduced the X6. The concept was no longer new, but the recognition shifted. The narrative became German engineering, and the credit followed the brand with a stronger position in the luxury hierarchy. The original idea remained, but the originator did not. So, how does a company prove a market exists and then lose ownership of the idea that defines it? To understand why the FX35 exists at all, you have to understand what was happening at Nissan in 1999. The company was in crisis. Nissan had posted losses in 7 of the previous 8 fiscal years. Debt was approaching 2 trillion yen. Renault took a controlling stake and sent Carlos Ghosn to run the company. In October 1999, Ghosn announced the Nissan Revival Plan, a restructuring program that closed factories, cut suppliers, and eliminated tens of thousands of jobs. But the plan wasn't only about cutting. It mandated investment in new product development in high-margin segments. Nissan couldn't cost-cut its way to profitability. It had to build things people actually wanted to pay premium prices for. The Infiniti brand was a specific problem inside that larger problem. Launched in 1989 to compete with Lexus, Infiniti had spent a decade underperforming its Toyota-backed rival. The Q45 flagship sedan, introduced the same year as the Lexus LS 400, never achieved the sales momentum Lexus captured. By the late 1990s, Infiniti's North American lineup was thin, aging, and positioned below where the brand needed to be. The luxury SUV segment was exploding. Infiniti's answer had been the QX4, a rebadged Nissan Pathfinder introduced in 1997, priced and positioned below the BMW X6 and Mercedes M-Class, and read by the market accordingly as a competent but derivative product. The FX35's development occurred inside this context. It wasn't supposed to be another QX4. It had to be the vehicle that announced Infiniti could compete at the top of the luxury crossover segment, on design, on engineering, on character. Ghosn's revival plan freed up the capital. The brand's commercial pressures supplied the urgency. What remained was the engineering directive. Build something the BMW and Mercedes buyer would actually look at twice. The revival plan's broader impact on Nissan's product strategy is worth understanding because the FX35 was one of several vehicles that emerged from the same commercial logic. Nissan launched the 350Z for 2003, reviving the Z car nameplate after a 7-year absence. The Infiniti G35 sedan arrived for 2003 as well, replacing the aging G2O. The Infiniti M45 followed shortly after. Each of these vehicles shared common engineering DNA: the FM platform, the VQ engine family, the rear-biased dynamic philosophy. Because amortizing development costs across multiple models was exactly how a company in financial recovery built a premium lineup it otherwise couldn't afford. The FX35 was part of that same wave. It wasn't a standalone product. It was the crossover application of an engineering investment Nissan was making across its entire performance-oriented portfolio. Infiniti's answer to the luxury crossover question was, therefore, to not build a new platform at all. The decision that shaped everything about the FX35 was the decision to base it on the FM platform, front midship, the rear-wheel drive architecture Nissan had already developed for the Infiniti G35 sedan and the Nissan 350Z. FM refers to a specific engineering principle. The engine mounts behind the front axle centerline, not above it. In a conventional front-wheel drive layout, the engine sits over or ahead of the front axle, and its mass pushes the vehicle's weight distribution forward. In the FM layout, the engine sits behind the front axle, pushing mass rearward toward the vehicle's center. The result is a weight distribution closer to what a rear-drive sports car achieves, without actually being a rear-drive sports car. Nissan didn't invent this layout for the FX35. It was already the G35's architecture. It was already the 350Z's architecture. Both vehicles had documented enthusiast followings built around exactly this handling character. What Infiniti did was recognize that the solution already lived inside the company's own portfolio. Rather than developing a crossover-specific platform, Infiniti's engineers scaled the FM platform upward: higher ride height, higher mass, different body mounting, recalibrated suspension geometry, while preserving the engine placement and the rear-biased weight distribution that made it handle the way it did. The internal platform designation was ATTESA 50. The production site was Nissan's Tochigi plant in Tochigi Prefecture, Japan, the same facility that would later assemble the Nissan GTR. That detail matters less for what it says about the FX35's build quality than for what it says about Nissan's manufacturing logic. The Tochigi complex was where the company's most engineering-intensive platforms were built. Putting the FX35 there signaled that this wasn't a mass-market crossover sharing a line with economy cars. It was being assembled in the same facility as Nissan's performance flagship vehicles, using shared infrastructure, shared tooling, and shared supplier relationships. The ATTESA E-TS all-wheel drive system reinforced the FM platform's fundamental intent. Most crossover AWD systems default to sending torque to the front wheels, adding rear engagement only when the front wheels slip. That logic produces predictable understeer, the front pushes wide in corners, and the driver corrects with steering input. It's safe. It's familiar to buyers coming from front-drive sedans. It's also the opposite of what you want if you're trying to preserve sports car handling. ATTESA E-TS reversed the logic entirely. Under normal driving, the FX35 operated as a rear-wheel drive vehicle. All torque went to the rear axle. Front torque was added only when the rear wheels slipped. The BMW X6, which had arrived in 1999, had reasoned similarly. BMW's X-Drive system used a roughly 38 to 62 front-to-rear default split, also rear-biased, for exactly the same reason Infiniti's system was rear-biased. Both companies had adapted rear-wheel drive car platforms for crossover use. Both recognized that defaulting to front torque would negate the platform's inherent handling advantage. Two different manufacturers, separated by geography and corporate culture, arrived independently at the same conclusion. If you're going to build a crossover on a sports car platform, you have to let it behave like the sports car underneath. But the X5 kept conventional upright SUV proportions. Its body was a box with utility-focused glass and roofline. The FX35's specific contribution wasn't the idea of adapting a car platform. BMW had already done that. It wasn't even the idea of rear-biased AWD in a crossover. BMW had done that too. The FX35's contribution was wrapping that engineering inside a fastback coupe silhouette, proving the two could exist in the same vehicle. That's the distinction worth protecting in the record. The FX35 didn't invent the performance crossover. It introduced the fastback coupe-crossover body style. The engine choice told you what Nissan actually valued. The VQ35DE, a 3.5-liter DOHC V6 producing 280 horsepower from launch, wasn't aggressive by sports car standards. A Porsche Cayenne S of the same era had 340 horsepower. The FX45's own V8 had 315. This V6 was moderate, almost conservative. The real priority lived elsewhere. Nissan specified a double wishbone front suspension and a multi-link independent rear, both derived from the G35's architecture, but recalibrated for the FX35's higher mass and higher center of gravity. Spring rates were stiff, damping was aggressive. Period road tests consistently noted a firmer ride than the BMW X6, which had chosen a more comfort-oriented calibration. Handling had been targeted above comfort. Lateral grip had been prioritized over body motion isolation. The FX35 was meant to corner, and the tuning reflected that directive without compromise. The steering system reinforced the same philosophy. The first-generation FX35 used hydraulic power steering, a conventional rack and pinion system with an engine-driven hydraulic pump. Electric power steering was already appearing across the industry, driven by fuel economy regulations that penalized the parasitic load of an engine-driven hydraulic pump. Nissan could have specified electric steering. It didn't. The hydraulic system stayed for the entire first generation because hydraulic systems produce more consistent steering feel. The feedback doesn't shift as the vehicle's speed changes the way electric systems assist curves do. Period road tests documented the FX35's steering feel as one of its specific positive characteristics. That feel was a deliberate engineering choice, not an accident of specification. The transmission was the RE5R05A, a Nissan Jotco 5-speed automatic deployed across the G35, the 350Z, and the FX35. Shared hardware across the FM platform meant shared service knowledge, shared parts availability, and shared tuning. The RE5R05A had a known wear pattern in high-torque applications, valve body solenoid wear producing delayed engagement at high mileage. But the VQ35DE's 270 pound-feet of torque sat comfortably inside its design envelope, and fluid change discipline handled the rest. The interior reinforced the same engineering priorities. Most crossovers of that era positioned occupants high, with expansive sightlines designed to evoke commanding the landscape from above. The FX35 did the opposite. The hip point dropped towards sedan-level positioning. The steering wheel sat at a near vertical rake rather than the bus-like forward angle most SUVs imposed. Seats were supportive rather than palatial, bolstered for lateral grip, not sized for lounge chair comfort. A buyer stepping out of a conventional SUV would find the cabin surprisingly close and purposeful. A driver who actually wanted to sense what the chassis was doing found the geometry exactly right. The fastback roofline created an unavoidable trade-off. The sloped rear glass that defined the vehicle's visual character reduced rear passenger headroom. Car and Driver and Motor Trend both documented the limitation in their 2003 evaluations. Tall rear passengers would be compromised in a way a conventional upright SUV wouldn't impose. Buyers accepted the compromise in significant volume, enough to sustain the vehicle commercially across a 6-year production run. That acceptance proved something genuinely new. People would sacrifice rear space for sports car exterior proportions. The fact that the later BMW X6, Mercedes GLE Coupe, and Porsche Cayenne Coupe all replicated the same compromise, each sacrificing rear headroom for coupe proportions, documents that the FX35 had identified a real, repeatable buyer preference. Pricing placed the FX35 at approximately $34,000 to $37,000 for the V6 variant, with the V8-powered FX45 arriving near $42,000. The BMW X5 4.4i landed around $48,000. The base Porsche Cayenne approached $43,000. Infiniti wasn't competing on prestige. It was offering a performance-oriented alternative at a lower price point, the cost advantage coming partly from amortizing the FM platform's development across the higher-volume G35 production, and partly from Infiniti's placement below BMW and Porsche in the luxury hierarchy. Price alone doesn't explain what happened next. 2008 arrived, and BMW introduced the X6. 5 years had passed since the FX35's launch. The X6 was a fastback roofline crossover built on the X5's platform, and the visual vocabulary was unmistakable. Sloped rear glass, low beltline, coupe proportions wrapped around a crossover body. Same concept as the FX35 had introduced in 2003. Different engineering foundation underneath. BMW priced the X6 between roughly $54,000 and $72,000, approximately $20,000 above where the FX35 had positioned itself at comparable points in its production run, and the X6 commanded immediate recognition. The automotive press credited BMW with legitimizing the fastback crossover segment. Reviews treated the vehicle as the beginning of a new idea in luxury automotive design. BMW called it the sports activity coupe and marketed it as the origin of the category. But the FX35 had already proven the market existed. It had already shown that this body style could sustain a commercial operation. It had already answered the commercial question BMW was now being credited with asking. Mercedes followed with the GLE Coupe in 2015, a fastback version of the GL class, built explicitly as a response to the X6's sales success. Porsche added the Cayenne Coupe in 2019, a raked roofline version of the third-generation Cayenne, positioned as a more emotional alternative to the standard model. All three European manufacturers adopted the exact body style Infiniti had introduced 12, 16, and 16 years earlier. The fastback crossover evolved from a single Infiniti experiment into an entire market subcategory worth billions in annual sales across multiple price tiers. The pattern is documented in production records. Sequential adoption of a design category Infiniti had pioneered by manufacturers with stronger brand positioning, who each received credit for the idea as they introduced it. Brand hierarchy in luxury automotive operates on perception, not chronology. When BMW unveiled the X6, the response from buyers and press wasn't measured acknowledgement of a second-generation concept. It was treated as validation of an entirely new category emerging from a prestigious German automaker. The BMW badge carried cultural weight Infiniti couldn't match, regardless of who came first in the record. Infiniti did receive recognition at launch. Car and Driver, Road and Track, Motor Trend, and Automobile Magazine all documented the FX35's design contribution without ambiguity in 2003. Period tests placed its handling above the BMW X5 on lateral metrics, while acknowledging the X5's superior ride comfort. Awards were given. Feature articles were published. Contemporary press understood perfectly well what Infiniti had done. But contemporary praise and historical credit are separate phenomena. Recognition in the moment doesn't guarantee credit in retrospect. The shift happened once European manufacturers entered the category. What had been framed as an Infiniti innovation in 2003 became the BMW design language by 2010, Mercedes's coupe SUV interpretation by 2016, and Porsche's take on the fastback crossover by 2020. The narrative rewrote itself through competitive adoption. Each European entry reset the market's memory of who had done it first. The technical record makes the omission particularly strange. Nissan's VQ56 engine family appeared on Ward's 10 Best Engines list for 14 consecutive years, from the award's inception in 1995 through 2008, the only engine in the list's history to hold a spot every year since the competition began. The 3.5-liter VQ35DE specifically held slots from 2002 through 2007, which spans almost the entire first-generation FX35 production run. Ward's 10 Best is editorial assessment, not manufacturer marketing. It's 6 journalists from Ward's Auto World and its engineering newsletter ranking production engines against each other across objective and subjective criteria. That panel was repeatedly ranking the engine inside the FX35 among the best engines available on the North American market, while the vehicle containing that engine was receiving no credit for the market category it had defined. What Infiniti lacked wasn't engineering. It was position in a hierarchy where perception supersedes innovation. A Japanese luxury brand couldn't own a category a German luxury brand could claim with greater authority. That's not commentary on engineering quality. It's observation of commercial reality. The originator had already proven the market. The Germans inherited the credit. Several engineering choices deserve more than a passing mention, because each one points back to the same underlying design intent. The FX45 variant used the VQ35DE 4.5-liter DOHC V8, the exact same engine Infiniti deployed in the Q45 flagship sedan. The Q45 was the car Infiniti had built in 1989 to compete with the Lexus LS 400 at the brand's North American launch. It was Infiniti's statement vehicle, the flagship that announced what the brand was supposed to be. When Infiniti needed a V8 for the performance variant of its new crossover, it didn't develop a new engine or buy one from a supplier. It took the engine from its flagship sedan. The Q45 version produced 340 horsepower. The FX45 version produced 315, tuned differently for different application requirements, but the fundamental architecture was identical. The company was telling you what it thought that the FX45 was: a flagship-grade product, not a mass-market crossover with a big engine option. The timing chain mattered more than it sounded. The VQ35DE used a chain rather than a belt, a choice that eliminated one of the most expensive scheduled maintenance items on competing vehicles. The BMW M54 inline-6 of the contemporary X5 used a timing chain, but the Toyota 2 used a -FE V8, the Honda J Series 5.6, and many European engines of the era used belts requiring replacement every 60,000 to 90,000 miles at a cost between $500 and $1,500. For the FX35 owner, that interval simply didn't exist. Across a 20-year ownership lifespan, the savings were substantial. Nissan never marketed the advantage. The press materials focused on horsepower and handling numbers, but the engineering decision saved owners real money for 2 decades. The Tochigi assembly detail has a specific weight worth sitting with. Nissan's Tochigi plant produced the FX35 on the same line complex where the Nissan GT-R would later be assembled. The GT-R's engines are built in a dedicated cleanroom facility inside the Tochigi complex by designated master craftsmen. The Takumi process Nissan publicly documents as the most precision-intensive assembly procedure in the company's production network. The FX35 was built through conventional line assembly, not Takumi hand building, so the comparison has limits. But the shared facility address documents something meaningful about how Nissan categorized the FX35 internally. It wasn't assembled at a mass-market plant alongside economy cars. It was built in the same factory complex as Nissan's most engineering-intensive production vehicles, using the infrastructure the company reserved for its performance lineup. The VQ35DE's cross-platform deployment created a parts and service ecosystem that has kept the FX35 alive long after the market moved on. The same basic engine powered the Infiniti G35, the Nissan 350Z, the Nissan Murano, the Nissan Maxima, the Nissan Pathfinder, and the Nissan Altima. Any independent shop with Nissan or Infiniti experience already understood the VQ35DE's behavior, its wear patterns, its service requirements. The FM platform's suspension and driveline shared knowledge with the higher volume G35 and 350Z applications. An independent shop that serviced those cars already knew the FX35's underpinnings. The engine wasn't a curiosity. It was embedded in a service network built across years of high-volume production. The hydraulic steering deserves one more note, because it became increasingly rare as the industry moved on. By the late 2000s, European luxury manufacturers were aggressively adopting electric power steering to meet tightening fuel economy and emissions targets. The parasitic load of an engine-driven hydraulic pump was no longer acceptable, but electric systems adjust their assist curves automatically. The feedback gets filtered through software logic, designed to compensate for different driving conditions. Experienced drivers often described early EPS systems as feeling disconnected, artificial, numb. The FX35's hydraulic rack was the opposite. Inputs at the steering wheel translated directly to responses at the front tires, with nothing interpreting the relationship. Period road tests consistently praised the steering feel as one of the vehicle's specific characteristics. When Infiniti moved the FX to electric assist in later generations, that particular quality was lost. First-generation owners who have kept their vehicles often cite the hydraulic steering as one of the reasons. A piece of engineering field that the industry has largely moved away from and can no longer replicate in new production vehicles. The RE5 R05A transmission hardware had its own quiet virtue. The 5-speed automatic was developed by Jotco, Nissan's transmission subsidiary, specifically for the FM platform's torque and power handling requirements. It was deployed in the G35, the 350Z, and the FX35 simultaneously, which meant service knowledge accumulated across 3 enthusiast-supported vehicle communities rather than being isolated to a single low-volume application. The transmission had a known long-term wear pattern. Valve body solenoids develop electrical drift at high mileage, producing delayed engagement or harsh shifts. But the failure mode was documented, the repair was bounded, and the parts supply was consistent across the 3 vehicles that shared the unit. A specialist shop familiar with any FM platform car could diagnose and repair an FX35 transmission without guessing. The FX35 second generation launched for 2009 on the revised S51 platform. The engine grew from 3.5 to 3.7 liters, becoming the VQ35DE with output rising to 325 horsepower. The fundamental philosophy stayed intact: front midship layout, rear-biased AWD, the handling character that had distinguished the first generation. By engineering measure, the second generation was a stronger vehicle, more power, more refinement, 6 additional years of accumulated knowledge about performance crossover dynamics. But the timing was catastrophic. The first generation FX35 ended production in 2008, the exact year BMW introduced the X6. The second generation arrived into a marketplace already redefined by BMW's prestige. Where the original had launched as the originator of a novel format, the second generation entered as a competitor in an established category. Buyer perception had already settled around the fastback crossover as a BMW design language. The X6 was selling at premium volumes. The Mercedes GLE Coupe was coming. Porsche's entry was in development. Infiniti's second-generation vehicle arrived into a market where the category it had created now belonged to someone else. Sales declined relative to the first generation, not catastrophically, but measurably. The fastback crossover segment itself was thriving. Infiniti's share of the market it had created contracted sharply. The company that proved the market existed didn't capture dominant share of the market. The originator established the concept, validated the buyer preference, built the infrastructure, and ceded profitability to competitors with superior brand positioning. Infiniti eventually renamed the vehicle the QX70 for its final production years, in a company-wide nomenclature shift that had the additional effect of severing the new name from the original FX's historical claim. The Infiniti FX35 stands as documentation that engineering excellence and historical credit are separate outcomes. It didn't invent the performance crossover. The BMW X5 had already proven a car-derived platform could deliver real handling dynamics in 1999. What the FX35 introduced, specifically and for the first time in production form, was the fastback coupe roofline silhouette applied to a crossover body. That single design contribution defined a market subcategory that now generates billions in annual sales across BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, Audi, and others. The engineering record is unambiguous. The Ward's 10 best recognition for the engine, the FM platform's shared lineage with the G35 and 350Z, the Tochigi assembly, the rear-biased ATTESA AWD, the hydraulic steering, the deliberate interior geometry, every technical detail aligns around the same directive the company gave its engineers. Build a crossover that drives like a car, and don't apologize for what has to be sacrificed to achieve that. The market's collective memory became something different. When BMW, Mercedes, and Porsche adopted the same body style years later, buyer perception attributed the category's legitimacy entirely to the European brands. The originator lifted the curtain. Everyone else stepped through and claimed the stage. The Lincoln Town Car tells the same story. It defined American luxury through engineering substance that foreign manufacturers would later claim as their own. Watch the Lincoln Town Car video to see how another originator's engineering legacy got rewritten by stronger brands.